Nolan Pierce learned the sound of a company breathing. You hear it in the tiny pauses before people answer. You feel it when a room full of veterans suddenly goes quiet because one new voice got too loud. That morning, I heard it the second the new director leaned back in his chair, smiled like he'd invented common sense, and said, "No more expensive foreign vacations on my watch." He said it slow, for effect, like he was tossing a grenade into the culture and waiting for applause. We're not in the business of sending people to Germany for pretzels and praise. A few people chuckled, the nervous kind. Most didn't. They looked at me, not because I was offended, because they knew what that vacation actually was. For 19 years, I'd handled our EU operating license renewal in person. It wasn't a perk. It was a yearly knife fight, conducted politely, face to face, with regulators who could shut down our European revenue with one cold email. I'd built relationships with people who didn't laugh, didn't forgive, and didn't care about our quarterly narrative. They cared about commas, timestamps, and whether you showed up when you said you would. The director's name was Grant Kessler, 2.5 weeks in, fresh MBA, fresh haircut, fresh confidence. He held a clicker like it was a badge, and stood in front of a slide deck glowing behind him like corporate stained glass. He didn't know the difference between a licensing visit and a sales trip, but he knew how to perform cost-cutting like theater. "We're modernizing," he continued, "digitizing, streamlining legacy behaviors." His eyes flicked to me with that half-smile that says, "I'm replacing your past with my brand." I kept my face neutral, not calm, controlled, because I recognize this type. The man who thinks experience is just old data. Someone across the table pretended to type, keys clicking softly, like the sound might break the tension. Grant's pointer tapped the slide. Projected savings, $9,400. Eliminated travel redundancy, $9 grand. That's what my redundancy was worth now. He looked around like he expected a standing ovation. "Nolan," he said, finally using my name, "we're reallocating this to my operations support lead. Brooke will handle the paperwork moving forward." Brooke, 23, smart, polite, still asking questions that begin with, "This might be dumb, but..." Grant called it empowerment. I called it handing a live wire to someone who'd never seen the circuit diagram. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I didn't educate the room like it was a classroom and he was a special case. I simply nodded once. "Understood," I said. One word would have been enough, but I wanted it on record. "I heard you. I accepted the chain of command. You own the outcome now." As the meeting moved on, Grant kept talking about agility and eliminating travel-heavy roles. People glanced at me like I was a museum exhibit about to be replaced by an app. I wrote nothing. I just watched him rewrite a system he didn't understand, and I felt the same thing I feel when an engine starts knocking. It might run for a bit, but the damage is already happening. When the meeting ended, Grant walked out with the clicker still in his hand, like he needed a prop to feel powerful. Brooke hovered near the door, clutching her laptop, eyes apologetic. I gave her a small professional smile. Then I went back to my desk and opened the travel portal. If Grant wanted the Germany trip canceled, fine. I was going to cancel it cleanly. And then I was going to document every step of what came next. I canceled the flight with the same precision I'd used to keep our European operation alive. Not angry, not dramatic, just exact. Because regulators don't care about your feelings, and neither do consequences. The non-refundable fee hit the corporate card. I could practically hear finance clapping. Then I drafted the email that would later become Exhibit A in a very expensive lesson. Subject: EU license renewal, materials and deadline tracker. Per new delegation, Grant's restructure wasn't subtle. He wanted everyone to see he'd fixed something. So I gave him transparency so bright it could burn. "Brooke," I wrote, "per Director Kessler's updated delegation structure, I'm forwarding the complete EU license renewal packet. Prior filings, regulator contacts, document templates, portal instructions, and deadline tracking. Please confirm receipt and assume responsibility for submission timelines. I'm available for questions within the scope of the new structure. Regards, Nolan." I CC'd Grant. I even attached a one-page checklist with bold red dates. Not as advice, as a time-stamped handoff. Brooke replied a few minutes later. "Got it. Thank you." Lots of exclamation points. "Good kid. Wrong battlefield." Grant didn't respond at all. Not a thumbs up, not a noted. Nothing. That silence told me everything. He wasn't delegating responsibly. He was amputating a function and calling it fitness. Over the next 2 weeks, he flooded the calendar with alignment meetings, color-coded goals, mandatory innovation workshops, slogans like, "Cut fat, not firepower." And every time he said legacy habits, his eyes landed on me, like I was an outdated policy he couldn't wait to delete. I stopped volunteering context. Instead, I started collecting data. Every meeting invite, every deck, every message where Brooke asked the kind of question that makes your stomach drop. Do we actually need wet signatures if we're digital now? And Grant responded with something like, let's not overcomplicate. Overcomplicate. That word is what incompetent people call reality when it refuses to be simplified. I built an archive folder on my drive and labeled it something boring, Q3 catering options. Inside, I saved everything. The delegation email, the checklist, the regulator's contact list. Screenshots of portal access changes after Grant revoked my credentials to reduce single points of failure. He said it like it was best practice. It was a lie dressed in jargon. My access removal wasn't a risk reduction. It was a power move, and it created a new single point of failure, someone who didn't know what failure looked like until it arrived. I updated my own private calendar with the renewal deadline, July 9th, then set 3 alerts, 1 week out, 3 days out, 1 day out. Not for me to act, for me to know exactly when the floor would give way. Meanwhile, Grant strutted through the office like he'd discovered spreadsheets. He replaced process maps with motivational posters about velocity. My favorite read, "Stop maintaining, start disrupting." Cute. He was about to disrupt our legal status in 3 countries. People asked me quietly, in the break room, "Why aren't you going to Frankfurt this year?" I stirred my coffee and said, "New management, streamlining." I smiled like it was harmless. It wasn't. It was a ticking timer, and I was done being the guy who absorbed the blast for everyone else. The first real crack appeared in a budget deck. Grant stood in front of the team, slide up, chin high, and pointed to a bullet like it was a trophy. International travel reductions. EU renewal visit eliminated. Forecast savings $47,000 annually. Beneath it, a cute little airplane icon with a red X over it. People laughed politely. Finance loved it. Leadership loves any savings that can fit on one line. I sat there with my pen resting on a blank pad, expression neutral, and felt something colder than anger settle in. Inevitability. Because the EU license wasn't a suggestion. It was the legal spine of our European revenue. Without it, customs holds your shipments, partners suspend access, clients lose service, and regulators fine you like a metronome. Grant didn't understand that you can't digitize a relationship built on presence and credibility. You can submit forms online, sure, but when something goes wrong, and in Germany something always goes wrong, the only thing that matters is whether the person on the other end believes you're competent enough to fix it. For 19 years, I've been that person. Now Grant wanted Brooke to be that person. And Brooke still asked if retroactive penalties meant we could pay later. After the budget meeting, my inbox filled with corporate cheer. Excited to see compliance evolve. Great win on cost control. Love the new direction. Translation? Glad you're not my problem anymore. I kept every message. I kept Grant's speaking notes. I kept the slide. I kept the chat reactions. Clapping emojis, airplane emojis, red X emojis. It was all going into the archive. I wasn't building a revenge plan. I was building a record of cause and effect. Because when the fallout comes, everyone suddenly forgets what they said. They pretend they didn't know. They pretend the timeline is fuzzy. I've watched that movie too many times. This time, I was writing the transcript. Brooke tried, in her own anxious way. She scheduled a license sync and showed up with a color-coded spreadsheet that looked like it came from a college group project. So the portal has, like, 2 login methods? She asked. I told her exactly what she needed to know, in plain terms, without stepping over the boundary Grant had drawn. There's a primary credential and a secondary certificate key, I said. If you don't have both, submissions fail. And if submissions fail, you don't get a reminder, you get a penalty. Brooke nodded fast, eyes wide. Okay, got it. Then she emailed Grant asking for approval to schedule a call with the regulator. Grant replied 2 words. Not necessary. Not necessary. like Germany was an optional feature. I printed that email and added it to the folder. 3 weeks out, I got copied on a message from a German regulator's office. Subject line: renewal packet status, action required. The email was precise and unkind. It outlined new ID requirements and a portal update. It ended with a sentence that should have made any competent leader sit upright. Failure to comply by July 9th will result in deactivation and penalties per Section 4.2. I checked the email thread. Brooke was on it. Grant was on it. I was copied last, like a legacy contact they hadn't scrubbed yet. I watched the read receipt status. Brooke opened it. Grant did not. I waited. No one asked me anything. No one escalated. Grant was too proud to admit he'd cut the wrong wire. Brooke was too junior to know when to scream. And I was no longer authorized to touch the portal. That wasn't bitterness. That was policy. Grant's policy. So I did the only thing left that I could do without breaking rules. I made another copy of everything. I encrypted it. I labeled the drive insurance. And I counted down the days like a man watching a storm roll in over the ocean, knowing exactly whose roof was about to lift first. A week before the deadline, Grant hosted a town hall, the kind where leaders pretend they're listening while talking over everyone. He wore a tighter suit, stood closer to the camera, and smiled like he'd solved the entire company with a few buzzwords. Slide 10. Operational excellence wins. There it was again. Airplane icon, red X, savings highlighted. And yes, Grant said, we officially retired the infamous Germany trip. He chuckled like it was an inside joke. Turns out e-signatures are cheaper than strudel. Laughter rippled through the call, the performative kind. The kind people make when the boss jokes and they want to stay off the layoff list. I didn't laugh. I watched. I noted the timestamp. I saved the recording. Because the thing about public victories is they become public liabilities when they're wrong. That afternoon, Brooke stopped by my desk with her laptop half open, fingers hovering like she wanted to ask something but didn't have the courage. Hey, Nolan, she said softly. I'm, trying to upload the updated ID documents, but the portal is rejecting the format. I asked one question. Do you have the certificate key installed? She blinked. The certificate? The kind of silence that makes your stomach sink. I pointed her toward IT and a specific procedure. Not because I was stepping back into ownership, because I wasn't going to sabotage a junior employee who'd been set up as a shield. Brooke left looking pale. 20 minutes later, she sent Grant a message requesting emergency approval for IT to issue the certificate. Grant responded in the team channel, for everyone to see. Let's not overreact. IT can look at it next week. Next week. The deadline was in 7 days. Germany doesn't care about next week. Germany cares about whether your submission is complete by the date printed in black and white. That night, I sat at home and opened the archive again. Delegation memo. Access revocation, budget slide, town hall clip, regulator email. Grant's not necessary response. His next week message. The record wasn't just complete, it was brutal. Every inch of the path had Grant's fingerprints on it. I stared at my unsigned resignation letter in my desk drawer, drafted months ago, clean, short, professional. I didn't sign it yet, not because I wanted to stay. Because I wanted to see the moment when the lie collapsed and the room stopped laughing. 2 days before the deadline, Brooke's status went yellow. In meetings. Then, out of office. PTO. She'd planned a long weekend, apparently. Grant approved it. Of course he did. In his mind, compliance was paperwork. Paperwork could wait. I checked the shared calendar. No scheduled calls with regulators. No submission confirmation. No portal screenshots. Nothing. Just dead space where a critical function should have been. The day before the deadline at 3:18 a.m. my time, the German regulator's office sent a final notice. Same subject line, slightly sharper tone. Same deadline, same consequence. Deactivation and penalties per Section 4.2. Brooke didn't open it. Grant didn't open it. It sat there in the thread like a lit match on a stack of dry paper. My cursor hovered over forward. I could have escalated. I could have walked into Grant's office and shoved the email under his nose. I could have saved the company again, but I wasn't the owner anymore. I was the name on a CC line, the guy whose job had been modernized out from under him. And there's a difference between refusing to help and refusing to violate the structure someone else demanded. Grant didn't want legacy interference. He wanted clean delegation. Fine. I left the email untouched, took a slow breath, and set my phone on my desk with the countdown visible. 24 hours, then 12, then 6. The next morning I walked into the office early, poured coffee, and waited. Not smiling, not gloating, just listening to the company's breathing, waiting for the moment it stopped. The first panic message hit at 8:07 a.m. EU portal error. Anyone else locked out? It came from our Berlin operations lead, a man who never used exclamation points unless something was actively on fire. I reread it twice. Then the second message. Customs flagged shipment 7K-219. Portal says license invalid. Then a third. Perishable freight held in Hamburg. Need clearance. My coffee tasted bitter, even with sugar. Grant replied fast, because for the first time the problem touched something he understood. Optics. Probably an IT credential issue, he wrote. Clear cache. Submit a help desk ticket. Loop me if it's still down by EOD. End of day. As if the EU had a customer service attitude. Berlin responded immediately. Not cache. Not browser. Account status reads inactive. We have 2 holds and 1 client escalation. Grant went silent. Brooke's status icon showed a tiny palm tree. Out of office. Tulum. Limited access. Of course. Somewhere on a beach, sipping something expensive, while our legal standing evaporated. I didn't move. I didn't jump in. I didn't run over to Grant like a superhero returning to the scene. I sat still and watched the chain reaction begin. Within an hour, Warsaw chimed in. Client access suspended. CRM refusing logins. Cyber incident? Not cyber. Bureaucracy. The cleanest kind of shutdown. No alarms, no smoke, just a system politely informing you that you are no longer allowed to operate. I opened the regulator's email again. Deadline, July 9th. Today was July 12th. 3 days late. I did the math in my head and felt my jaw tighten. Germany's penalty structure wasn't gentle. I'd seen it applied to companies that thought they could argue. The base fine had changed this year. It wasn't 100,000 euros a day like last cycle. It was 85,000 euros per day, retroactive, automatic. 3 days meant 255,000 euros already, before the add-ons, storage fees, contract breach penalties, expedited reauthorization costs. Grant walked out of his office and leaned over a junior analyst's desk, speaking too loudly. "This is a temporary outage," he said. "We'll get it sorted." He glanced toward me like he expected me to rise, confess, and fix it. I stayed seated, not because I wanted to watch the world burn, because I wanted the world to respect gravity again. There was a difference. The Berlin lead posted again. "We are dead in the water. Customs won't release anything without active license number verification." Then, Client Rotman Group is threatening contract suspension. Then, our Munich Partner Council is asking for formal explanation by noon. Grant's face changed from confident to tight. He started making calls. He barked at IT. He demanded server checks and back-end flags. IT came back with the same answer they always do when leadership tries to blame technology for management decisions. "Systems are up. This is legal status, not infrastructure." You could see Grant's brain hit a wall. He didn't understand how something small like a license could stop big operations. He'd never learned that law is the frame and business is the painting. Remove the frame and everything falls. At 10:36, I got a direct message from Brooke. The tone was breezy, like she didn't realize her name was about to be carved into a disaster. "Hey Nolan, Director Kessler wants to know if you can assist. What do you need from us?" I didn't answer in chat. I opened Outlook, found the March delegation email, and forwarded it to Grant. No added commentary, no emotional sentence, just the subject line and his own words. All future licensing responsibility will be handled by Brooke's team, effective immediately. Then I hit send. 2 minutes later, Grant's office door slammed hard enough to rattle the glass wall. People turned their heads. Someone whispered, "Oh no." I took a slow sip of coffee. The bomb wasn't loud when it went off. It was silent, clinical, and unstoppable. And the worst part? The company was only just starting to feel the burn. By Friday morning, it wasn't just Berlin. Hamburg went dark, Munich stopped processing, Warsaw lost platform access. It spread like a blackout across Europe, not because our tech failed, but because our permission to exist there had been revoked. At 6:22 a.m., the customs broker emailed, "Urgent. Freight held at Port of Hamburg. License expired. Daily refrigerated storage fees accruing. Advise immediately." I stared at the phrase, refrigerated storage, like it was a threat. That shipment contained product with a shelf life. Every hour it sat was another piece of profit bleeding into the dock. At 7:10, sales forwarded a client email in all caps. "Why are we locked out of the platform?" At 7:45, legal posted in the executive channel. EU operations potentially non-compliant, seeking immediate status and mitigation. Grant dragged half the company into a Zoom call. He showed up with frantic energy and no plan, which is what happens when someone builds their authority on confidence instead of competence. "I need to know how a license issue can shut down multiple regions," he snapped. "This makes no sense." Our systems admin, calm as a man explaining gravity to a toddler, said, "Because the license is tied to our EU framework. Without it, the portals won't authenticate. Customs can't verify. Clients lose access. That's how it works." Grant's eyes darted. He looked for a way to convert that into an IT ticket. There wasn't one. Then the blame started rolling downhill. "Why wasn't I notified?" he demanded. "Why didn't Berlin escalate? Then, why didn't Brooke flag this earlier?" He said Brooke's name like it was a shield. Brooke, on a beach, responded from her phone. "I forwarded things to IT earlier, but didn't realize it was this urgent." The word realize hung in the air like poison, because the urgency had been printed in black and white. It had been emailed. It had been explained. It had been calendared. The only reason she didn't realize was because Grant had trained her not to. We don't overreact, remember? At 9:03, the biggest EU client we had, Rotman Group, requested an emergency call. Their CFO was on it, voice tight, patience non-existent. "We cannot access our procurement module," he said. "Our cycle is frozen. If this isn't resolved today, we are reviewing all active contracts." Sales tried to soothe. Grant tried to sound in control. It came out as noise. I wasn't invited to speak. I was only invited because someone remembered my name used to be associated with stability. I stayed muted and listened, because that's what professionals do when leadership is learning, in real time, how expensive arrogance is. After the call, I walked to the basement storage room and pulled out a manila folder I'd prepared months earlier. Inside, printed timelines, emails, screenshots, and a clean chain of events. Grant's signature appeared at the top of the delegation memo. His language, his decision, his savings. I didn't march it into the boardroom like a hero. I set it on my desk like a loaded exhibit and waited for the next inevitable step. The moment leadership stops asking, "What happened?" and starts asking, "Who did this?" And when that question came, I wasn't going to raise my voice. I wasn't going to plead my case. I was going to slide the truth across the table and let it land where it belonged. The boardroom had that pre-storm hum when I walked in. Low voices, tight faces, executives pretending they weren't terrified. The CEO, Victor Hale, stood at the head of the table like a man holding a live grenade he didn't know how to disarm. The CFO's hands were steepled, unmoving. Legal counsel had a folder open like a weapon. Then Victor slapped a courier envelope onto the table. The sound was sharp and final. "This," he said, voice clipped, "was delivered to my home at 6 a.m. He didn't wait for anyone to ask what it was. He pulled out the letter and read the first line. "Formal notice of EU operating license deactivation." Silence. The air felt heavier. "The penalty," Victor continued, slower now, because numbers hurt when they're this stupid, "is 85,000 euros per day. Retroactive, non-negotiable." The CFO slid a printed spreadsheet forward. It looked like a death certificate made of math. "As of this morning," he said, "we're at 1,615,000 euros in penalties and escalating, not including refrigerated storage, breach exposure, partner litigation risk, and the revenue impact of suspended access." Nobody spoke. Then Victor looked up, eyes scanning the table like a judge searching for the guilty. Who owned this renewal process? He didn't ask gently. Grant Kessler shifted in his chair, adjusting his collar like it suddenly tightened. The process was restructured, Grant said. We delegated for efficiency. Delegated to whom? Victor cut in. Grant's throat bobbed. To Brooks' support team, he said. It was transitioned in Q1, documented. Documented. That was the word that made me almost smile because yes, it was documented, just not in the way he thought. I didn't speak. I opened my laptop, rotated it toward the center of the table, and slid it forward like a final chess move. On the screen, a timeline. March 6th, Grant's email delegating all responsibility. March 7th, my handoff email to Brooke with the full packet and deadline tracker. April 18th, Grant revokes my portal access to reduce single points of failure. June 29th, regulator updates ID requirements. Thread opened by Brooke. July 7th, final notice sent. July 9th, deadline. July 12th, portal deactivation and customs holds. July 14th, courier notice to CEO. Each date had a clickable proof, emails, screenshots, meeting minutes, recordings. Grant's budget slide celebrating the trip cancellation. His town hall joke about strudel. His not necessary. His next week. It wasn't a story, it was a chain. Victor stared at the screen. The CFO leaned in, eyes narrowing. Legal counsel's expression changed in that quiet way attorneys do when they stop wondering and start calculating liability. Victor looked back at Grant. You signed this delegation memo, he said flatly. Grant tried to speak. Victor didn't let him. You removed Nolan's access, Victor continued, voice lower now, more dangerous. You publicly celebrated eliminating the regulatory visit that kept our revenue legal. And now we're bleeding 6 figures a day because you wanted a slide deck win. Grant's mouth opened. Nothing came out. The room didn't need my words. My silence had receipts. Legal counsel whispered something to Victor. Victor nodded once, then looked at Grant like the decision had already been made the moment the courier arrived. Leave your badge with reception, Victor said. Effective immediately. The board will reconvene tomorrow for damage control. Grant didn't stand right away. He stared at the timeline like it might change if he blinked hard enough. It didn't. When he finally stood, it was mechanical, the movements of a man who just watched his own career end in a spreadsheet. I closed my laptop. Still no smile. Justice, when it's clean, doesn't need drama. It just needs documentation and timing. And now the only question left was what Victor wanted from me, because the moment Grant fell, everyone remembered who built the system he tried to dismantle. Grant's office was half empty by the time I passed it. Cardboard box on the desk, his motivational mug, disrupt or die, wrapped in bubble wrap like it deserved protection. Nobody spoke to him. No comforting pats. No, you'll land on your feet. Just the cold social vacuum reserved for people who turn out to be liabilities. HR called it administrative leave pending review. Everyone else called it what it was, the fall. Around 2 p.m., Victor Hale's assistant appeared at my desk, voice careful. He'd like to see you privately. The walk to the corner office felt unreal, like watching yourself in a film you didn't audition for. Victor didn't waste time. Sit, he said. I sat. He didn't shout. He didn't posture. He looked exhausted in the way only leaders look when they realize their trust structure was rotten. We can't undo what happened, he said, but we can recover, with your help. He slid a folder across the desk. Inside, numbers, clauses, signatures, a retroactive compensation adjustment, a retention bonus, reinstated authority, a new title that implied respect. It was everything I would have fought for 6 months ago. And the fact that it arrived only after catastrophe made my chest tighten with something like grief. Not because I wanted revenge, because I wanted competence to matter before the building caught fire. Victor watched my face like he was trying to read whether I'd save him or leave him. Name your terms, he said quietly. We'll meet them. I didn't open the folder again. I reached into my bag and placed an envelope on top of it. Neatly folded, signed, dated, not notarized. This wasn't a courtroom, but formal enough to be final. Victor's eyes dropped to it. Is that my resignation? I said. No heat, no victory lap, just truth. Victor's jaw tightened, not in anger, in regret. "Nolan," he said, "I'm sorry it came to this." I stood. "I'm sorry it cost you," I replied. He exhaled slowly, like he'd been holding his breath since the courier arrived. "If you leave," he said, "we lose the only person who understands the relationships." I looked at him for a moment, not cruelly, not smugly. "You already lost that person," I said, voice low, "when you let someone treat stability like waste." Victor nodded once, accepting a reality he couldn't bargain with. I turned toward the door. My hand rested on the knob, and for 1 second I let myself feel it. The years of 3 a.m. calls, the clean audits, the invisible labor that kept the machine running. "One more thing," Victor said. I paused. "If you go," he asked, "what are you going to do?" I didn't answer immediately. Not because I didn't know, because the answer was almost poetic. I looked back, calm, controlled, and said, "I'm going to Germany." Victor blinked, confused. I gave him a small, tight smile. "Just not for you." Then I walked out. No goodbye tour, no dramatic speech. I returned to my desk, packed 2 folders, my mug, and the encrypted drive labeled insurance. As I left the building, I felt lighter, not triumphant, released. Behind me, people would scramble to repair what Grant broke. In front of me, I had something rarer than revenge, freedom, and a first-class seat waiting. I didn't send a farewell email. I didn't make a grand exit. I just left, because the loudest statement you can make in corporate life is removing your labor without explanation. In the parking lot, the summer air felt thick, almost syrupy. My phone buzzed with messages I didn't open. "Are you okay? Can you help us fix this? Please tell me you're still here." Funny how fast people remember your value when the lights go out. At the airport, I didn't book economy. I didn't check my inbox. I walked to the counter and asked for the first-class seat to Frankfurt. The agent typed, smiled, and handed me the boarding pass like she was giving me a key to a new life. I carried my bag through security with the calm of a man who no longer had to catch the fall for anyone else. In the lounge, I sat near the window, watched planes taxi like quiet, obedient machines, and thought about the absurdity. Grant's entire crusade began because he wanted to look good cutting vacations. He'd turned my yearly regulatory fight into a punchline. He'd reduced 2 decades of stability into a red X on a slide. Now the company was paying millions because it believed a joke. My phone buzzed again. A message from legal counsel. "We may need your testimony for internal review." Testimony. Like I'd been a witness to a crime. I stared at the words, then set the phone face down. I wasn't angry at the company. I was done with it. Boarding was called. I walked onto the plane, found my seat, and settled in. When the flight attendant offered champagne, I accepted. Not as celebration, as punctuation. 30,000 feet above the mess, the clouds looked soft enough to forgive everything. I watched the city shrink and felt my shoulders loosen for the first time in months. Somewhere back in that boardroom, Victor Hale would be staring at penalty projections, watching the number climb. 1.7 million euros, 1.785, 1.87, plus storage fees, partner threats, client rage. Somewhere, Brooke would be crying in a bathroom, realizing she'd been used as a shield. Somewhere, Grant Kessler would be staring at a cardboard box, trying to understand how quickly confidence can become unemployment. And somewhere, a regulator in Germany would be doing what German regulators do, applying rules without emotion. That's the thing about consequence. It doesn't hate you. It doesn't love you. It doesn't care who you are. It just arrives. On the flight, I opened a small notebook and wrote 1 sentence across the top of a clean page. Never confuse cost-cutting with competence. Then I closed it and watched the clouds. When we landed, the air in Frankfurt smelled like rain and coffee and something old, like stone. I checked into a hotel I didn't pick for proximity to a conference room. I picked it because the lobby bar looked quiet. That night, I walked cobblestone streets with no badge, no calendar alerts, no executive guilt chain tugging me back. I ordered espresso, sat outside, and let the city exist around me without needing anything. The next morning, I'd meet someone I knew, an old compliance contact who'd always treated me with respect because I'd earned it. Not to fix anything for Victor, not to restore any revenue stream, just to remind myself what competence looks like when it's recognized. Back home, they'd call it a disaster. They'd call it a costly mistake. They'd call it a failure of process. I called it something simpler, the price of mocking the only thing holding the whole operation together. 2 days into my trip, I got one last update. Not from leadership, but from an old colleague who didn't know how to keep quiet. "They're in full panic," the message read. "They hired an emergency compliance consultancy. They're begging regulators for reinstatement. They're offering anything." I pictured Victor Hale in his office, tie loosened, eyes red, trying to buy back a thing he'd allowed to be dismissed as unnecessary. I pictured the board demanding answers. I pictured the consultants charging an obscene hourly rate to discover what I'd already built. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. That night, I returned to a small restaurant near the river, the kind of place you'd never find on a corporate itinerary. The waitress recognized me from years before, back when my trips had been all meetings and deadlines. "You're back," she said, surprised. "Business?" I smiled. "Not this time." She laughed, warm and easy. "Good," she said. "You looked always serious before." She brought espresso without me asking, like it was a small act of respect. I sat there and felt the irony settle into something almost gentle. The company had tried to cut the one trip that kept everything legal. The vacation, they mocked, was the glue. And when they cut it, the structure didn't wobble. It collapsed. Cleanly, predictably, expensively. On my final day, I walked through a market, listened to languages mix in the air, and let myself breathe without checking a portal. My phone stayed in my pocket. No pings, no escalations, no pleading. Back home, they'd be counting penalties and praying for mercy that doesn't exist in regulatory systems. They'd be reading my timeline like scripture, searching for a line where someone could have saved them. They'd find it. It would be stamped with Grant's name, and beneath it, Victor's failure to stop him. That's the part leaders hate. Accountability doesn't care how tired you are. It cares what you allowed. On the flight back, also first class, I watched the route map across the screen and felt something settle. Not revenge, not victory, but clarity. There are people who keep companies alive and never get thanked because the system is quiet when it works. And then there are people like Grant, who mistake quiet for useless and think they can delete gravity. When we landed, I turned my phone on. A single email sat at the top from Victor Hale. Subject, final request. He wrote a few lines. No blame, no defensiveness, just regret and an offer to talk. I didn't delete it. I didn't answer it. I archived it because some messages are meant to be remembered, not responded to. The following week I started consulting, selectively. Not for everyone. Not for companies that treat compliance like a nuisance. Only for teams that understand a simple truth. Stability is not a luxury, it's a function. And if you publicly mock the function, you'd better be ready to pay for the silence when it's gone. If you want a title for what happened to Grant, here it is. He didn't cancel a vacation. He canceled the thin layer of respect that kept our European business legal. And the moment that layer vanished, the system did what systems do. It enforced reality, quietly, daily, in euros.